It was the kind of silence that sits on your chest, not peaceful, not the silence after a good meal or a long prayer, the kind that comes after the phone rings at 2 in the morning and you already know, before you even pick up, that something has been taken from you. Olamide found out her husband was gone on a Tuesday. She found out the restaurant was drowning on a Wednesday. And by Thursday, she had decided she was not going to cry anymore, not in front of her daughter, not in front of her staff, not in front of anyone. She had learned that from her mother. You grieve on the inside, you work on the outside, and you never ever let them see you fold. The restaurant was called Adinkra House. It sat on the corner of Maple and 9th in a neighborhood that couldn't decide if it was gentrifying or just tired. The walls were painted the color of warm clay. There were kente cloth runners on every table, small and folded neat, the way her mother-in-law had taught her. There was a chalkboard menu that Olamide updated every week by hand, because the customers liked the handwriting. They said it felt personal. She never told them it took her 45 minutes every Sunday night, because her hands shook when she was exhausted, and the chalk kept breaking. Felix had started the restaurant. Felix had the vision. Felix had the personality that made strangers feel like family before they even sat down. He would walk through the dining room like he was hosting a party in his own home, touching shoulders, remembering names, asking about children and surgeries and new jobs. People came back to Adinkra House because of the food, yes, but mostly because of Felix. And Felix died of a cardiac event in the walk-in freezer on the last Friday in September. He was 41 years old. He had complained about chest tightness for 3 weeks and kept says he would see a doctor after the weekend rush. He never made it to the doctor. Olamide was 37. She had a 9-year-old daughter named Cece, a restaurant with 4 employees, a lease that renewed in 4 months, and a husband-shaped hole in everything she had built. She kept the restaurant open. People told her not to. Her sister flew in from Atlanta and said, "Mide, close it down, come home, start over." Her mother called from Lagos and said the same thing in Yoruba, which somehow made it sound both gentler and more final. Her landlord, Mr. Petrovich, who was not unkind but was very practical, sat across from her in the empty dining room 2 weeks after the funeral and told her that he understood her situation, but that rent was rent. She thanked him. She showed him the door. She went into the kitchen and stood over the stove for a long time, not cooking anything, just standing there with her hand on the burner knob. Then she turned it on and started making jollof. Because what else do you do? The first month was survival, just survival. Nothing more romantic than that. One of her cooks quit. He had a family, and he wasn't confident the restaurant would last, and Olamide couldn't blame him. She didn't have the energy to be angry. She posted the job listing on 3 different sites, got 42 applications, interviewed 6 people, hired none of them. One showed up late. One admitted he had never cooked West African food, but was a quick learner. One was excellent, but wanted a salary she couldn't afford. Then her dishwasher, a sweet older man named Mr. Yusuf, threw out his back and had to stop working indefinitely. That was the week she almost closed the restaurant. She didn't, though. She pulled an extra shift herself on the sink. She posted the dishwasher job on a Tuesday afternoon. She got 3 calls by Wednesday evening. One of them was from a man named Kolade. He came in on a Thursday morning. She almost didn't take the meeting. She had deliveries coming, and Cece had a school thing she needed to reschedule. But he was already standing at the door when she arrived, and something about the way he stood there made her pause. He was not what she expected. He was tall, very still, the kind of still that looks deliberate. He wore a plain gray shirt, well-fitted but simple. No jewelry. Clean hands. He shook her hand and waited for her to speak first. You applied for the dishwasher position, she said. I did. Have you done this kind of work before? He considered the question for a moment longer than people usually do. Not this specifically, he said, but I learn fast and I work hard. That was it. That was the whole interview. She didn't ask for references. She didn't have time. She needed someone at the sink by Friday, and he was here, and he had clean hands, and he was not visibly a problem. She told him the pay. She told him the hours. She told him she ran a tight kitchen, and she expected people to show up and to stay out of the drama. He nodded. That's fine. You start tomorrow, she said. He said. Yes, ma'am. She told herself later she only hired him because she was desperate. Maybe that was true. Maybe it wasn't. He was good at the work. That surprised her. Not good the way someone is good when they've done something for years. No, it was different. He was good the way a person is good when they are paying very close attention. When they are watching everything and thinking about it and taking it seriously. He was never late. Not once in the first 2 weeks. He was always there when she arrived, which meant he was arriving before her, and she arrived early. She noticed this, but didn't mention it. He cleaned everything thoroughly, even the things nobody checked. She found him once re-cleaning a pot that had already been cleaned, turning it slowly under the light like he was looking for something. She almost said something, "That's already done." But she watched him for a moment and saw that he wasn't being obsessive. He was being careful. There was a difference. After the first week, she noticed he had started organizing the kitchen supplies differently. Not reorganizing. She would have said something, but incrementally adjusting. The way a person does when they've figured out a more efficient flow, but they don't want to overstep. She realized this because the prep cook, a young woman named Toyin, mentioned one morning that she couldn't figure out why things felt easier to reach. Olamide figured it out. She didn't say anything to Kolade. But she watched him more carefully after that. One evening, she was in the back going over inventory, and she overheard him talking to Toyin at the sink. Toyin was complaining about one of the sauces. She said the proportions had been off all week and she didn't know what changed. Kolade asked a few questions, not in an intrusive way, just genuinely. What does it taste like now versus before? Is it the base or the finish? Did anything change in the supply order? Toyin said she hadn't thought about the supply order. Kolade said quietly, sometimes the issue isn't the cook, it's what the cook was given. Olamide wrote it down on the back of an invoice and kept it. By the 3rd week, she had started doing something she hadn't meant to do. She was talking to him, not a lot. Not in a way she could point to and say, there, that's when it started. It was more like the way water gets into old walls. Not all at once, but gradually, and by the time you notice it, it's already part of the structure. She told him about the specials she was thinking of adding. He listened. He asked whether they had the storage capacity for the additional prep. She hadn't thought about that. He was right. She told him that one of their regulars, an elderly woman named Mrs. Oforiwa, who came in every Wednesday for the Contomeyer stew, hadn't been in for 2 weeks. She didn't know why she told him this, he said. Do you have her number? She did. She called the woman that evening. Mrs. Oforiwa had been sick. She was touched that someone called. She came back the following Wednesday. She told him about Cece once, just once, and briefly. Her daughter had had a rough week at school, some business about a group project that went sideways, and a friend who wasn't being a friend anymore. Kolade listened. He didn't try to fix it. He just said, that age is hard. She'll find her people. It was such a simple thing to say. She didn't know why it made her exhale. She caught herself one afternoon thinking that Felix would have liked him. Then she made herself stop thinking about it. He never talked about himself. This she noticed. He answered questions politely but briefly. He didn't elaborate. When Toyin asked where he was from, he said, West Africa originally, and smiled and turned back to the sink. When one of the servers, a young man named Kwiku, no, wait. When one of the servers tried to make small talk about where he lived, Kolade said, not far, and let the conversation end there. At first, she thought he was just private. She could respect that. She was private too. But something was slightly off. Small things. The kind of things you only notice if you're paying attention to a person, and she was paying attention more than she meant to. His hands. They were careful at the sink, competent, but they moved like hands that were not used to this kind of work. Not clumsy, the opposite of clumsy. But they had the particular precision of someone who had spent a lot of time doing something very different and was now applying that precision somewhere new. His phone, on the one or two occasions she glimpsed it, looked expensive. She wasn't sure why she noticed that. He had once, when a vendor came in to discuss a new pricing structure and started talking numbers, said something under his breath that was exactly right, a point about volume margin that she had been struggling to articulate for weeks. She asked him to repeat it. He looked slightly startled, like he hadn't meant to say it out loud. He repeated it simply, added nothing, and went back to what he was doing. She let it go. She needed him at the sink. Whatever his story was, it was his. It was during the fourth week that things shifted. She had been trying to figure out the menu for a private event, a 40th birthday dinner, for a customer who wanted something that felt authentic, but would also work for guests who weren't familiar with West African food. She was struggling. She had been struggling for 3 days. She kept running into the same wall. The food she wanted to cook required either equipment she didn't have or a level of simplification that felt like a betrayal. She was sitting at the counter at closing time, papers spread out, cold tea in a cup, when Kolade came out of the kitchen with his jacket. He paused when he saw her. Long night? Long week, she said. He looked at the papers. She hadn't hidden them. She wasn't embarrassed. She was too tired to be embarrassed. The Mensas event, she said, because he would have heard about it. I can't make the numbers work with the menu I want. He set his jacket down on a chair. He'd sat across from her. She hadn't asked him to sit. He didn't ask for permission. He just sat down and said, Tell me what you're trying to do. So she told him, and he listened. He asked questions that were good questions, the kind that didn't tell you what to think but opened up the thing you were already thinking so you could see it better. And then, very carefully, he suggested something. A way of restructuring the courses so that the more complex dishes functioned as accent points rather than centerpieces, letting the simpler dishes carry the volume. It was exactly right. She stared at him for a moment. He met her eyes and didn't look away, but he didn't press, either. Where did you learn to think like this? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. I've been around business a long time, he said. That wasn't a real answer. She knew it wasn't a real answer. But she also knew, in the particular way that women who have survived too much tend to know things, that pushing would not get her what she actually wanted to know. Thank you, she said. It's a good restaurant, he said. It deserves to work. She looked at him for a moment. Why are you here? She asked. She meant it genuinely. Not accusatory, just real. Why are you at my sink? He looked at her steadily. Because this is where I need to be right now, he said. She decided, that night, to stop asking questions she wasn't going to get answers to. The day before day 30, Cece came to the restaurant after school, the way she sometimes did. She did her homework at the back corner table. She ate whatever Toyin made her. She was quiet, the way children are quiet when they are feeling something and haven't figured out what to call it yet. Kolade was at the sink. He didn't make a big deal out of seeing her. He just said, Hey, the way you say it to someone you've seen before. Cece said, hey back and went to her table. But sometime in the middle of the afternoon, Olamide came out of the office and found them both at the counter. Kolade was showing Cece something on a piece of paper, some kind of sketch, it looked like. Cece was asking a question. Her whole face was open the way it only is when she's genuinely interested in something, not just being polite. Olamide stood in the doorway for a long moment. She thought about Felix. She couldn't help it. The image came without her permission. Felix at this same counter, showing Cece something. Cece with that same open face. She went back into the office. She sat down. She pressed her palms flat on the desk and breathed. She did not cry. She had made herself a promise. But she sat there for a long time. Day 30 was a Saturday. It started like a normal day. Deliveries at 7, prep at 8. Toyin came in with coffee for everyone. The lunch rush was steady, not overwhelming, just the good kind of busy that means you're doing something right. Kolade was at the sink. He was the same as he always was. Quiet, focused, present. Around 2 in the afternoon, a black SUV pulled up in front of the restaurant, then another one, then a third. Olamide was at the register. She saw it through the window and didn't think anything of it at first. The neighborhood had changed. People with money came here now. A motorcade wasn't impossible. Then the doors opened. The men who stepped out were wearing suits, not the kind of suits you wear to a church or a job interview. The kind that are made for you specifically, that move with you like a second skin. They stood on the sidewalk and they looked at the restaurant, and then one of them opened the back door of the center vehicle. The man who stepped out was older. He walked with the particular ease of someone who has never had to hurry for anyone. He was well-dressed, silver-haired, and he looked at Adinkra House with an expression that was hard to read. Then Kolade came out of the kitchen. He had removed his apron. He was still in his work clothes, but he had removed the apron and that small detail, the apron in his hands, the SUVs on the street, made the dining room go very quiet. The older man looked at Kolade. Kolade looked at the older man. Kwam, the older man said, and that was not the name Olamide knew him by. She found out later, piece by piece, the way you find out things that change the shape of everything, that his full name was Kolade Kwame Asante Boadi, that his family had been in business across 3 countries for 2 generations, that the older man was his father, Emmanuel Asante Boadi, who ran one of the largest import-export operations in West Africa and had holdings in 6 countries, and had been quietly watching his son for 30 days from a very careful distance. She found out that 6 months ago, Kolade had walked away from his father's company, not ran away. Walked, deliberately, with full knowledge of what he was giving up. He had told his father, "I need to know if I can build something on my own. I need to know if I'm worth anything outside of your name." His father, being the kind of man he was, had said, "Fine, 30 days, no money, no company name, no safety net, and then we talk." Kolade had chosen Adinkra House because his father's company had once done business with a supplier who served this neighborhood. And he had heard about this restaurant, this woman whose was keeping something alive after loss, and something about that had called to him. He hadn't planned to stay as long as he did. He hadn't planned any of what happened. She found out most of this not from him, but from his father, who sat across from her in the dining room, after the lunch rush while Kolade stood nearby and the suited men waited outside. Emmanuel Asante Boadi was not what she expected. He was direct, but not unkind. He said, "My son has told me about what you've built here. He has also told me about what you've been through. I'd like to ask you something." She said, "Go ahead." He said, "Would you allow us to invest in this restaurant? Not as a takeover, as partners. You keep full ownership of the operation. We provide capital, supply chain access, and distribution potential for your recipes if you ever want to scale." He paused. "My son believes in this place. In 30 years, I have learned to pay attention when he believes in something. Olamide sat with that for a long moment. She looked at Kolade. He had not coached her. He was not nodding encouragingly. He was just looking at her, the way he always did, steady, present, not pushing. She said, "I have some questions." Emmanuel said, "Of course." They were in there for 2 hours. Toyin kept the kitchen running. The dinner rush started. Olamide negotiated from a seat in her own dining room, in her own restaurant, wearing an apron she hadn't taken off, and she did not apologize for any of it. She asked about terms. She asked about exit clauses. She asked what happened if the partnership didn't work. She asked what scaling actually meant and what it would do to the food, because the food mattered more than the revenue, and she needed him to understand that before they went any further. Emmanuel Asante Boadi listened to every question. He answered them. When she pushed back on something, he adjusted. When she said something was non-negotiable, he wrote it down. Near the end, he said something she didn't expect. He said, "My son tells me you remind him of his late mother." She was also someone who would not be moved. Olamide didn't know what to do with that. She filed it away. Before they stood to leave, she looked at Kolade directly and said, "I need to ask you something." "Yes," he said. "Did you lie to me?" He was quiet for a moment. "A real moment, not a performance. I told you my name was Kolade," he said. "That's true. I told you I learned fast. That's true. I told you this is where I needed to be." He paused. "Everything I told you was true. What I didn't tell you was everything else." "That's a distinction," she said. "It is," he said, "and I'll understand if it matters to you." She looked at him for a long time. This man who had come in with clean hands and taken her chaos seriously and fixed her kitchen flow without being asked, and sat across from her in the empty dining room and helped her save an event she couldn't figure out on her own. "It matters," she said. "I haven't decided yet how much." He nodded. He didn't argue. She respected him for that. After they left, after the SUVs pulled away and the dining room filled back up, and Toyin was calling for her from the kitchen, Olamide stood at the counter for a minute by herself. Cece appeared at her elbow. She had been in the back the whole time, doing homework, taking everything in the way children do when adults think they aren't paying attention. "Mama," Cece said. "Yes, baby. Is the restaurant going to be okay?" Olamide looked at the kente cloth runners on the tables, at the chalkboard she had written herself, at the door where a black SUV had just been parked. "Yes," she said. "Because of those people?" "Partly," Olamide said. "Partly because we were already making it okay before they showed up." Cece thought about this. "Is Kolade coming back?" Olamide was quiet for a second. "I don't know yet." Cece nodded. She seemed to accept this as a reasonable answer, which was one of the things Olamide loved about her daughter. She didn't need false certainty. She just needed honesty. He did come back. Not that night. Not the next day. On Tuesday, 3 days later, he came back, no apron, no pretense, just himself, and he asked if she had made a decision about the partnership. She said she had. She said yes to the capital, yes to the supply chain access, no to anything that touched the recipes or the dining room culture. Non-negotiable, he said. "My father expected that. So did I." She said, "I have another question. Okay. Why this restaurant? I've heard the explanation. I want to hear it from you." He was quiet. He looked at the table beside them, the kente runner, folded neat. "I'd been in boardrooms my whole life," he said. "I'd been in meetings and proposals and acquisition calls, and I'd lost the thread of why any of it was supposed to matter." He paused. "I wanted to be somewhere where the work was real, where I could see whether I was worth anything when nobody knew my last name." "And," she said. He looked at her. "I'm still figuring that out," he said. "But I think this place helped." She thought about Felix. She thought about the chalkboard. She thought about Mrs. Oforiwa coming back on a Wednesday because someone had called to check on her. It has a way of doing that, she said. Now, before you go, I want you to sit with something. He didn't lie about who he was. He just didn't tell her everything. And she had to decide whether that was something she could work with. Some of you watching right now are going to say he had no right, that what he withheld was just as dishonest as what he could have said. I understand that. I don't entirely disagree. But here's what I keep coming back to. He showed up every single day. He fixed what was broken. He listened when it would have been easier not to. He sat in that dining room at closing time and helped her save an event that would have broken her budget. And when she asked him directly, he didn't flinch. He didn't spin it. He said, "Everything I told you was true." So here's my question for you, and I want you to think about it honestly, not just answer fast. Could you work with that? Could you build something with a person who kept a secret, not to hurt you, but to find out if the real thing between you could survive without the weight of a name? Drop your answer below. And if this story stayed with you, you already know what to do. Stay close to this channel, because there are more where this came from. This is what destiny looks like when it isn't dressed up. It shows up in an apron. It asks quiet questions. It fixes the kitchen flow when nobody's watching. And sometimes, if you're paying attention, you recognize it before the black cars arrive.